At 2:47 on a cloudless Saturday in early October, with 63 guests seated in white garden chairs along the north terrace of Aldermere Inn, Naomi Thayer received a video from Simone's phone. The clip ran 41 seconds. Carter Moss and Simone Vega stood in the lower parking garage beneath the inn. Naomi recognized the concrete pillar, painted with a blue stripe she had noticed that morning, while helping unload the floral arrangements. Carter had Simone pressed against the hood of the black sedan, hired to take the newlyweds to the airport. Simone was laughing at something he said before they kissed again. The camera was propped against the windshield, angled deliberately to capture the whole scene in a single uninterrupted frame. No caption, no explanation. The video simply ended. Naomi watched it twice. The second time, she noticed Simone was wearing the small pearl drop earrings Naomi had lent her that morning, because Simone said she'd forgotten her own. Then she pressed the home button, opened her documents folder, and screenshot the video thumbnail, preserving the file name, the timestamp, and Simone's sender ID in the same frame. She sent both images to a cloud folder she maintained for the firm's contract archives. The officiant had begun to look uncomfortable. Beyond the terrace, the inn's garden rolled out in terraced levels. Naomi had spent 3 weekends last spring advising the groundskeeper on soil drainage, unpaid, because she loved the space and assumed she would be spending a great deal of time in it after today. She put the phone in her bouquet hand and walked to the officiant. "There won't be a ceremony," she said quietly. "Please give me the microphone." Her father, Alden Thayer, rose from the front row. "Naomi, whatever has happened? I need 30 seconds. Then I need you to sit down." The microphone carried a small burst of static when she raised it. Every face on the terrace turned toward her. "Carter will not be joining us today," she said. "I've just received confirmation that he left the property with a guest. The ceremony is canceled. The dinner and music are fully paid for, so please stay and enjoy the afternoon. The staff will be compensated in full. If anyone needs transportation arranged, please see the inn's coordinator." She returned the microphone before the next sentence could become something she would regret. At the back of the terrace, a man in a dark green jacket separated himself from the standing guests. Naomi recognized Gideon Rowe from 2 previous meetings, a sustainability conference in March and a site visit in June, when his development group, Rowe Summit, had been evaluating her firm's modular sensory garden design for their upcoming lakeside rehabilitation campus. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she was simply noticing him differently now. He reached the garden path before she did. "Naomi," he held a cream envelope at his side. She stopped. "You weren't on the guest list." "I came to deliver my answer in person," he said. "You asked me to look you in the eye. Carter told my office last week that you had withdrawn the Thayer-Verdant proposal. I didn't believe him." Cold clarity arrived faster than anger. "I never withdrew it." "I know." Gideon glanced briefly toward the terrace where her parents were now surrounded by confused relatives. "There's more and the timing is terrible. But waiting may cost you more than the next few minutes." He handed her the envelope. Inside was a single-page summary from Rowe Summit's legal team. 3 days earlier, Carter Moss had contacted their acquisitions director and presented a revised proposal under the name Moss Terrain Design, describing himself as co-founder and operational director of Thayer-Verdant Studio. The revision stripped the accessible pathway specifications from Naomi's original blueprint to reduce projected construction costs. It also included a transfer of licensing document, showing that Naomi had assigned Moss Terrain a 40% interest in her modular garden patent 12 days ago. Naomi had not signed any such document. She had not heard of Moss Terrain Design until this moment. She folded the paper once and slid it back into the envelope. "Send this to my email and to my attorney," she said. "No copies to Carter." Gideon nodded. "Your decision. Everything from here will be my decision." She called Uma Delacroix first, the attorney who had incorporated Thayer-Verdant Studio 4 years ago, and who had flagged Carter's informal involvement twice in the past year. Uma never said "I told you so." She didn't have to. "Change every password you control right now," Uma said. "Tell Felix to suspend Carter's credentials before you do anything else. Then call your bank." "I'm in a wedding dress." "Best dressed person to ever protect an IP portfolio, go." Naomi called Felix Obi, her operations director, next. He was inside the reception room and answered on the first ring. Within 7 minutes, Carter lost access to the firm's project drive, client portal, vendor accounts, and building badge system. The bank flagged 2 issues when she called. A payment request for $210,000 had been submitted the previous Monday to an LLC called Moss Terrain Design for consulting and site services rendered. The payment had been held for secondary approval because the payee was new to the system. A second request for $74,000 had cleared 2 weeks earlier to the same company. Cancel the pending transfer, Naomi said. Flag any future requests associated with Carter Moss or Simone Vega for direct confirmation from me, and pull the records on the $74,000. She also closed the supplemental card Carter used for client meetings. Then she canceled the card Simone had been carrying for 6 months under the claim that she needed it to purchase plant specimens for a pro bono project she and Naomi were supposedly collaborating on. Naomi had never asked why a graphic designer needed access to a landscape procurement account. The answer was somewhere over the Atlantic. When she returned to the terrace, Gideon was speaking with the inn's event coordinator. He stepped back when Naomi approached. I told her nothing, he said. She wanted to know about the kitchen. Keep everything open. Naomi looked out at the garden. The string quartet had started again, some instinct for filling silence. Is there a family services organization the inn works with? Someone who could use a catered dinner on short notice? Gideon made the call. By 5:30, 2 vans arrived from a local transitional housing program. The tables filled back up with people who had not been expecting a meal that evening. Her parents intercepted her beside the herb garden. Simone called your father, her mother Corinne said. Her face was rigid. She says Carter had a breakdown. Panic attack. She drove him somewhere quiet. She sent me the video from her own phone. Alden's jaw tightened. Could it have been taken out of context? It was 41 seconds long. I know what I saw. Corinne touched her arm. Don't do anything public yet. Think of what this does to his career. You've worked with the same people for years. He was working against me for the same years. Those aren't the same thing. She left them with that sentence and went back inside. Carter called at 8:15. Wind noise crackled through the line. Listen before you make this worse, he said. Simone was in a bad place. I got her out of the venue because I was worried about her. I should have told you, but there was no time. Where are you? A pause, somewhere quiet, a few days. Send me your return date in writing. Naomi, come on, we can postpone. Don't cancel anything connected to the apartment or the firm. I'll fix this when I'm back. He didn't know she had already seen the Moss Terrain document. He believed she knew only about the parking garage. He was performing damage control for the wrong crisis. Take all the time you need, she said. Send the date in writing. She ended the call before he could say anything else. The apartment was held in Naomi's name through a trust her grandmother had established. Carter had moved in 2 years ago and gradually stopped referring to it as her place. Naomi called a locksmith that night. The next morning, she had the building code changed and the study lock replaced. She packed Carter's belongings into labeled boxes and photographed each one. Her attorney confirmed she needed to provide written notice before removing anything, so the boxes stayed in the second bedroom with a collection notice attached. Carter's response arrived within 4 minutes. This is my home too. Naomi replied through Uma. The property is held by the Thayer Family Residential Trust. You have received formal written notice. Future communications regarding collection of your belongings should be directed to counsel. Simone sent 11 messages. The first said Naomi was being dramatic. The fourth claimed she had simply been comforting Carter after a difficult week. The eighth threatened to tell Naomi's clients she was erratic under pressure. The 11th asked why her firm's procurement card had been declined at a hotel in Lisbon. Naomi saved the 11th message. Tell me what you found, she told Felix when she arrived at the studio the following morning. Truth before kindness. Felix handed her a printed log. Carter downloaded the Lakeside Campus proposal, the Sensory Garden patent draft, and our full client list at 1:52 a.m. Wednesday. Simone's contractor login, which Carter created 6 weeks ago without my authorization, accessed our media library 3 hours later. I've suspended both. Simone didn't have a contractor account. Carter approved it himself and tagged it under a pro bono project code. He also approved 6 invoices to Moss Terrain over the past 3 months. 2 have cleared. The larger transfer is still pending. Naomi felt anger arrive without the fog of shock. Everything was visible now, the architecture of it. Carter had spent 3 years making himself useful, reviewing contracts, sitting in on client calls, attending conference dinners where he learned the names of the people whose trust mattered. He had made himself indispensable, just long enough to hollow out a space beneath her name. Freeze every Moss Terrain invoice, she said. Protect payroll and supplier payments first. Send all records to Uma, but keep this inside the building. Felix hesitated. Carter told the senior team you were planning to step back after the wedding. He circulated a consent memo. 2 people initialed it. They thought it was a wedding contingency plan. I did not. Naomi looked through the glass wall at the studio. Designers had their heads down over site models. A materials specialist was rolling a sample cart toward the testing bay. These people had come to the wedding Saturday, not for a romantic spectacle, but because they believed the firm was something worth celebrating. They deserved to know it still was. Get everyone in the workshop in 10 minutes. She didn't tell them about the parking garage. She told them Carter no longer represented Thayer Verdant in any capacity, that no leadership change had been authorized, and that an independent audit had begun. Salaries and active projects were protected. Anyone who had received unusual instructions from Carter should forward them to Felix without editing anything. There will be rumors, she said. You are not required to defend me. You are required to protect our clients, our work, and each other. The room stayed quiet until Prena Adeyemi, the youngest landscape designer on staff, raised her hand. Are we still presenting the Lakeside campus proposal? Naomi thought of the envelope Gideon had handed her on the garden path. Yes, she said. We're presenting it without the man who tried to take credit for it. The shift in the room was almost physical. Shoulders dropped, pens moved, someone opened a laptop. Uma arrived at noon with the Moss Terrain licensing document, the bank's transfer records, and a vendor binder Naomi had left in the office safe. Behind the insurance tab was a document titled Operational Authority Continuity Agreement, which would have granted Carter the right to execute contracts on Naomi's behalf during any medical absence or travel period. The signature on the last page resembled Naomi's, but not exactly. Carter had never learned that she'd stopped closing the loop on her lowercase n after graduate school. I've never seen this document, Naomi said. The file metadata shows it was created on Carter's laptop, Uma replied. He apparently believed the marriage would make any challenge to it more complicated. Naomi looked at the document for a long time. Don't freeze the Moss Terrain account yet. Let Carter think the licensing transfer is still processing. If he believes it's going through, he may keep talking. Uma raised an eyebrow. That carries risk. Help me contain the risk. Don't help me avoid the decision. Uma considered, then nodded. Gideon called the following morning. I have a question that has nothing to do with your personal life, he said. Do you still want the Lakeside campus project? Yes. Then come to the site. There's something you should see before our committee meets. The Lakeside Rehabilitation Campus occupied a former industrial parcel at the edge of the reservoir. Gideon was waiting near the gate without an assistant or a security detail. He handed her a coffee, black, and didn't apologize for guessing. My original plan includes a contiguous sensory pathway, Naomi said, when they reached the area Carter's revision had flagged for cost reduction. Not a separate accessible section. One path that serves every user the same way. Carter's version separated it. I know. His version would have saved roughly $40,000 in grading and surface treatment. Our committee was split. 3 members liked the cheaper number. Naomi knelt and pressed her hand into the soil near the bank. Separated paths tell patients recovering from stroke or amputation that they occupy a different category of guest. The therapeutic benefit drops when the environment signals exclusion. You'd spend $40,000 building a space that undermines its own clinical purpose. Gideon crouched beside her. I know, that's why I chose your proposal. Your committee hasn't voted yet. They will. I've already made my recommendation. They walked the rest of the parcel in mostly comfortable silence. At the reservoir's edge, he said, Carter told our acquisitions director you were emotionally volatile after the canceled wedding. He suggested the project might be at risk. Naomi looked out across the water. What did your acquisitions director do? Called me. I called you, he said it simply, as though it were the only reasonable sequence of events. He also sent a letter on a wellness clinic's letterhead, she added, claiming I'd been advised to take a leave of absence. Gideon turned toward her. I received it. It went to Uma and our legal team. We didn't act on it. Don't delete it. Preserve it. Then ask Carter in writing whether I authorized him to disclose any medical information. She watched Gideon's expression calibrate. You want him to answer. I want him to commit to a lie in writing. Carter answered the question Gideon's legal director sent within 20 minutes. He claimed Naomi had signed a broad health proxy as part of their shared financial planning. He attached the Operational Authority Continuity Agreement as evidence. The document was supposed to apply only after their marriage, which had not occurred. Carter had just described a non-existent authorization to a third party and tied himself directly to a forged document. The wellness clinic confirmed in 2 paragraphs that it had never treated Naomi and had not issued the letter. The clinic administrator recognized the letterhead as an image copied from their public website. Uma sent the confirmation only to the parties who had received Carter's original claim. The Rose Summit Committee kept the project on its timeline. The family meeting happened the following Monday at her parents' house. Carter arrived before Naomi did and positioned himself at the head of the dining table, though it wasn't his home. Simone sat beside him in a silk blouse Naomi recognized from the firm's brand shoot 2 years earlier, borrowed and apparently never returned. Can we speak privately? Carter said when Naomi walked in. Uma is here because you used forged documents affecting my company and my property. She stays. She's going to make this adversarial. You left my wedding. She's here to make this clear. Simone touched her collarbone. You're acting like we planned something. Carter was worried about me. The timing was terrible, but it wasn't malicious. Tell me why Moss Terrain Design exists. A beat of silence. Simone glanced at Carter. It was a holding structure, Carter said. For future projects, I plan to bring it to you after the wedding, once we'd formalized things. You submitted it to Rose Summit as an existing entity with a claim on my patent. A miscommunication with their acquisitions team. Name one deliverable Moss Terrain provided to justify $74,000 in paid invoices. Carter looked at Simone. Simone looked back with an expression Naomi had never seen on her face before, something measuring and cold. Scope was still being finalized, Carter said. Naomi's father, Alden, set down his coffee cup. Carter, you told me last month those invoices were subcontractor deposits on the Lakeside project. The first crack. Carter leaned back. We're losing the point here. Naomi and I were about to merge our lives. Some preliminary financial restructuring was natural. Uma's pen moved. No merger of business assets occurred. Thayer Verdant Studio is not marital property. No marriage took place. Stay out of a family conversation. She's here because you involved yourself in my business without authorization, Naomi said. You don't get to decide what's family and what's professional after crossing both lines. She placed the Moss Terrain licensing document on the table. This carries my signature. I didn't sign it. The loop on my lowercase n is wrong. You practiced, but you never noticed. I changed how I wrote it after graduate school. The room went very quiet. Carter said, You signed every document I handed you over 4 years. You can't possibly remember every. Uma wrote the sentence down. Naomi stood. My 30 minutes are over. She left them with the fact of what he'd just said. Outside on the front step, her hands were shaking. She sat on the low stone wall near the driveway and let the reaction move through her rather than pretend it didn't exist. Uma sat beside her without speaking. I missed it for years, Naomi said. You saw it when the cost of seeing it was as high as it could be. Through the dining room window, she could see Simone and Carter's reflections. They were arguing. Whatever the trip to Lisbon had been, it had not strengthened what existed between them. Without Naomi's resources between them, they had only each other and the exposure they had created together. The civil case moved forward methodically. The patent office confirmed the licensing transfer was invalid. Naomi had never executed it. The bank's records showed the $74,000 had been funneled through Moss Terrain to pay the deposit on a vacation property listed in Simone's name. Uma added the wellness clinic letter and the forged authority document to the filing. Carter's former business associate, Baxter Holm, who had briefly been listed as Moss Terrain's registered agent, provided emails showing Carter had promised him access to Thayer Verdant's client network after the marriage secured Carter's authority. Baxter had suspected the arrangement was irregular and withdrawn before the wedding. He still faced a civil claim for the period he'd participated. Carter responded by blaming Simone. He sent a voice message claiming she had pressured him to leave the ceremony by threatening to reveal earlier instances of his infidelity to Naomi. Simone responded by forwarding Uma a message thread in which Carter described the wedding as a closing date and outlined his plan to use the operational authority agreement to sign contracts on Naomi's behalf, while she transitioned into what he called a creative advisory role. Their alliance didn't dissolve. It shattered, each piece sharp enough to cut the other. The Rose Summit Committee approved the Lakeside Campus project 3 weeks after the canceled wedding. 5 votes to 2 in favor of Naomi's original proposal, including the contiguous sensory pathway. Gideon recused himself from the final vote, as Rose Summit's governance policy required, given their developing professional relationship. Naomi stood at the back of the meeting room and watched the tally appear on the screen. Felix was beside her. Prena was on the phone outside, waiting for the result. Carter learned about the contract through a legal notice regarding the Moss Terrain claim. His response arrived within the hour. "You signed this without me. Call me now." Naomi replied through Uma, "You hold no ownership interest, officer role, or authorized agency in Thayer Verdant Studio. The firm has corrected any prior representations to the contrary." He called 6 times that afternoon. Each call went to silence. The Lakeside campus broke ground the following spring. Naomi spent mornings on site and afternoons in the studio. She and Gideon argued about the pathway's surface material. He preferred the cheaper composite. She wanted decomposed granite, because the sound of footfall mattered to patients in auditory therapy. She brought in 2 physical therapists and an audiologist to make her case. Gideon listened to all 3, then approved the granite. "You didn't have to defer," she told him afterward. "I deferred to the evidence," he said. "That's different." She noticed that about him slowly. When she said no, he asked why rather than asking again in a different tone. When he was wrong, he said so without reframing it as her idea. When she was working and needed him to wait, he waited. He asked her to dinner for the first time in November. Not a working dinner, he clarified. No site plans. No committee notes. Is this sympathy for what happened? It isn't. Is this professional strategy? Naomi, he said her name plainly. I think about you when there's no project in front of me. That's all this is. She felt caution rise, with the memory of every small warning she had dismissed over 4 years. She didn't hold Gideon accountable for a harm he hadn't caused, but she didn't pretend the harm had left no residue. One dinner, she said, and the first time you make a decision for me because you think your resources give you that right, there won't be a second. Understood. He paused. That seems efficient. Their first dinner lasted close to 3 hours. He did not send a car she hadn't requested or resolve a problem before she knew it existed. When photographers later noticed them leaving a restaurant, and his communications director offered to issue a statement, Naomi told him not to bother. 2 adults leaving a restaurant did not require a press release. Carter issued one anyway. Through a source at a trade publication, an article appeared, claiming Gideon had exploited Naomi's emotional state to secure the Lakeside contract for himself. The article quoted an unnamed Thayer Verdant source, suggesting the vote had been irregular. Naomi called a staff meeting. Someone spoke to a reporter about the project under conditions that could damage our client relationships, she said. I'm not demanding a confession. I am saying that if anyone received contact from Carter Moss, requesting information about our firm, forward the original message to Felix. By the end of the day, Prena came to Naomi's office. He called me 2 weeks ago. I told him I wouldn't comment. I didn't know he'd record the call and edit it. He had. Prena's actual words, Naomi is under real pressure, but the Rose Summit contract was properly reviewed. Had been trimmed to Naomi is under real pressure. The contract was reviewed, implying doubt rather than confirmation. Prena gave the reporter her full written statement and the call log. The publication corrected the article. Naomi instituted a policy. Any external media inquiry related to firm projects would be handled through a rotating employee committee, rather than any single spokesperson, including herself. The structure Carter had tried to destabilize became more resilient because of the attempt. Simone tried a different angle. She contacted 3 of Thayer Verdant's hospital clients with a presentation for a competing firm called Vega Green Environmental Design, which featured a sensory pathway concept so similar to Naomi's modular system that two clients sent Naomi the file directly and asked if it was hers. It wasn't, but the underlying geometry was. Naomi didn't issue a public statement. UMA sent Vega Green and its development partner a letter identifying the protected design elements and requesting removal before any presentation. The development partner compared the files and withdrew within 48 hours. The client meeting Simone had scheduled was canceled when the venue discovered the deposit had been charged to a Thayer Verdant corporate card that was no longer active. Simone called Naomi's mother to say Naomi had destroyed her only chance at professional independence. "She used my design as the product," Naomi said, when Corinne relayed this. "She didn't build something independent. She copied what I built." Corinne was quiet for a moment. "She says she was inspired by your work." Inspiration doesn't have the same measurements. Naomi gave her mother the number for a small business counselor who could help Simone close Vega Green responsibly or rebuild it around original concepts. Simone didn't call. Corinne did something Naomi had not expected. She called Simone herself and told her in writing that she no longer had permission to invoke the family's name or professional relationships in any future business dealings. It was a small action. It cost Corinne something. Naomi didn't thank her with the warmth she might have shown if it had come sooner. But she acknowledged it, clearly and without condition. Carter's riverfront development fell apart 6 weeks after the canceled wedding when his financing partner learned the Moss Terrain licensing claim was under dispute. Without the asset, he lost the site and the deposit he'd borrowed against his condominium. The court issued a preliminary injunction, preventing Carter from representing himself as a co-founder or authorized representative of Thayer Verdant Studio. It didn't resolve everything, but it closed the door he had been walking through for 3 years while calling it an open partnership. Criminal investigators charged Carter with document fraud, attempted theft by deception, and identity-related offenses connected to the forged signatures. Simone faced separate charges regarding the unauthorized invoice approvals and the stolen design presentation. Her cooperation with investigators and the comparatively smaller dollar amount of her involvement kept her from prison. She received probation, restitution obligations, and a 2-year prohibition from operating a licensed design firm. Carter received confinement, substantial restitution to Thayer Verdant, and a prohibition from serving as a company officer during his supervised release period. The riverfront property, his condo, and most of his investment accounts were liquidated to satisfy the judgments. His career, the access he had spent years building, the position he had believed was almost his. All of it dissolved through the choices he had made to preserve it. Naomi attended the necessary hearings, answered what was asked, and returned to work. She didn't celebrate. Revenge had never needed an audience. It had only needed the space Carter had occupied. Return to the people he had borrowed it from without asking. Gideon proposed on a Wednesday morning in March, inside the lakeside campus's nearly finished sensory garden, while the granite pathway was being laid in its final section. He knelt beside the contiguous junction she had fought for in the committee meeting. He held a ring, a pale blue tourmaline she had mentioned once in passing, during a conversation about mineral pigments in landscape materials. She hadn't remembered saying it out loud. He had apparently been paying attention. "Naomi Thayer," he said, "I came to your first wedding because I wanted to give you my answer in person. I stayed because of what you chose to do when everything changed. Will you choose this now?" She looked at the ring, the garden, the pathway that curved in one uninterrupted line for every person who would ever walk it. "Yes," she said, "but I want agreements before announcements. Separate property, clear business lines, and no surprises." He looked up at her with something close to relief. "I'd have been disappointed by anything less." They spent 2 months in negotiation before planning any ceremony. Uma represented Naomi. Gideon retained his own counsel. Naomi kept Thayer Verdant Studio, her apartment, and the Thayer Trust interests. Gideon retained Roe Summit Group and his private holdings. Neither held authority over the other's company or medical decisions through marriage alone. The process was deliberate and unhurried, and it gave Naomi something she hadn't had the first time around: informed consent. They married on a Tuesday in October, 14 months after the canceled wedding, at the Lakeside Rehabilitation Campus, before the building opened for the day. 38 guests, close friends, the Thayer Verdant employee trustees Uma, Felix, Prena, 2 members of Gideon's operations team, and the lead groundskeeper who had helped install the sensory path. Naomi invited her parents separately. Alden arrived early. Corinne asked once whether Simone might be included. Naomi said no, simply and without apology. Corinne came anyway and did not ask again. There were no hidden documents in the vendor binders. Uma had reviewed the marriage license herself and placed it in a plain white folder that stayed with the officiant. The document named Naomi Thayer and Gideon Rowe. Both had appeared before the county clerk 48 hours earlier, presented identification, answered the required questions separately, and signed in the clerk's presence. Nothing depended on an assumption that affection could substitute for law. Naomi wore a simple ivory dress with long sleeves and carried rosemary she had grown in a pot on her studio windowsill. She wore her grandmother's earrings, the pearl drops Simone had borrowed and returned, eventually, via Uma, after the litigation concluded. At the garden entrance, Alden offered his arm. "I'm not giving you away," he said before she could speak. "I know," she said. "You're walking with me." "I know that, too." They crossed the granite pathway together. Halfway to the center arch, Naomi kissed her father's cheek and walked the last section alone. Gideon waited at the contiguous junction. He had built a company large enough to appear in financial quarterlies and development reviews, but on that morning he wore the same expression he'd had on the garden path at Aldermere Inn. Still, attentive, ready to accept her answer. The officiant confirmed both parties entered willingly. They exchanged vows each had written without showing the other. "I will not call your silence agreement," Naomi told him. "I will ask before I assume. I will speak before a small frustration becomes a private story I tell myself, without checking it against the truth. And I will keep choosing you, without asking either of us to disappear." Gideon held her hands. "I will not use care as another name for control. I will respect the work and the relationships that exist outside of us. I will tell you the truth when it costs me, and I will remember that being chosen once doesn't end the choosing." They exchanged rings. The officiant pronounced them legally married. They signed the certificate at the pathway's entry arch, with Uma and Felix as witnesses. Only then did Gideon kiss his wife. The applause rose and carried outward through the open morning air. Breakfast was served at one long table set along the completed pathway. No head table, no hierarchy of chairs. The groundskeeper sat beside Gideon's senior engineer. Prena sat beside Naomi's mother. Alden spent most of the meal talking to Felix about the construction timeline. And Naomi watched her father learn something new. About the firm he had spent years only partially understanding. Carter heard about the marriage from a professional contacts newsletter that mentioned the Lakeside campus opening. He wrote Naomi a letter. She read the first paragraph, the familiar effort to convert regret into continued access, and authorized Uma to respond only to the remaining restitution questions. She didn't read the rest. His regret had arrived after he'd lost the leverage it might have purchased. It belonged entirely to him. Simone sent a single message 6 months after her sentencing. "I hope the garden is everything you imagined." Naomi read it once, replied it is, and didn't promise anything further. One honest sentence was one honest sentence. It wasn't a relationship. It wasn't a debt to be repaid. It was simply what it was. On the afternoon of the Lakeside campus's first full week of patient intake, Naomi walked the sensory pathway with a group of occupational therapy staff who had been testing its acoustics. One section near the water feature was too loud. The granite was capturing the fountain's echo in a way she hadn't modeled correctly. The site manager began to apologize. "Don't," Naomi said. "Mark it. If a test never finds a problem, the test wasn't real." Gideon was watching from the arch. He had recused himself from the post-opening contract evaluations, as agreed, and the independent committee had rejected one of her proposed upgrades as too costly. She had revised the design and moved forward. Their relationship had survived both decisions without either of them pretending otherwise. When the staff dispersed, he came down the path and handed her a small paper cup of coffee. Black, no longer a guess. "There's a question I've been saving," he said, "for after the campus opened, so the contract wouldn't be sitting between us when I asked it." She turned toward him. "Are you glad you stayed?" Naomi looked at the pathway, continuous, uninterrupted, the same surface and the same destination for everyone who would ever walk it. "I didn't stay," she said. "I built." He understood the difference. She could see it in the way he smiled. They walked back up the path together, neither one ahead of the other, into the morning that was already fully, irreversibly hers.